We're going to be doing a few problems related to completing this square. If you look in the notes, we're actually not going to do this stuff. We did these in class, this type in class last time, and we're not going to do number 1. We will do number 2 in just a second, but before we do that, I'm actually going to give you a different one to do. So we have x squared minus 12x plus 76 equals 0. This one is pretty similar to ones that we've been doing. There's one small difference, and that occurs at the end. I'd like you to pause this video and give this one a try on your own. You can stop if you get to a point where you're not sure what to do next. So for this problem, the first thing that we do when we use completing the square is we move over the constant number, just so that we have only x squared and x terms on the left side. So I get x squared minus 12x is equal to negative 76. You'll notice I left a blank. I left a space. So then what I'm going to do is, if you recall, we're going to put in a number that is half of negative 12 squared. And that number, half of negative 12 is negative 6. Negative 6 squared is 36. And so we're going to do plus 36 and plus 36. Don't forget to add it to that right side. On the left side, am going to factor this. This factors to x minus 6 times x minus 6, or x minus 6 squared. On the right side, I end up getting negative 40. You may or may not realize that this one's weird at this stage. We have never had one where you have a negative on the right side. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to solve this using square roots. Take the square root of the left side, take the square root of the right side. Don't forget to put the plus minus in. On the left side, I get x minus 6. On the right side, I get plus or minus the square root of negative 40. So at this stage, you might realize that we are going to have an I in the problem because I have a negative under the radical. So I'm going to rewrite this square root as the square root of negative 1. And then 40 is 4 times 10. There's a few other ways to write 40, but I'm going to choose 4 times 10 because 4 is a perfect square. So I end up getting x minus 6 is equal to plus or minus I times 2 times the square root of 10. The last thing I need to do to solve this is move the 6 over to the right. I get x equals 6 plus or minus. You can write it as I times 2 times radical 10. You can write it as 2 radical 10 times I. I'm going to write it as 2I radical 10. This is the normal mathematical way of writing it, but I will accept several other answers with the I in different locations. So for question number 2, once again, feel free to pause the video and try this on your own. So first thing I need to do for number 2 is make it so that this x squared term has only a coefficient of 1. So I do that by getting rid of that negative 4 that's in front of it. And that means I'm going to divide this by negative 4. I'm going to divide this term by negative 4. I divide this term by negative 4. And I divide this one by negative 4. By the way, if there's something other than a 0 on the right side, you're probably going to want to combine it with the constant that you have on the left side. So I end up getting x squared minus 6x plus 25 is equal to 0. We do not need to keep a 4 factored out in the front if we have a 0 on the right side. If you will get some in the future where you have a y on one side, and then you will have to factor out the negative 4, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So as with the last one, we are going to subtract 25. We're going to subtract our constant, get it as x squared minus 6x is equal to negative 25. I am going to fill in the blank with, once again, it's half of the middle number squared. So half of negative 6 is 9 or is 3, and negative 3 squared is 9. So I'm going to add that to both sides. On the left, when I factor it, I get x minus 3 times x minus 3, or x minus 3 squared. On the right, if I combine these terms, I get negative 16. So the last thing I need to do is square root both sides. Not quite the last thing, but one of the next things. I'm going to get x minus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 16. And there's two things going on. I have the negative and I have the 16. The negative means I have an I. The square root of 16 is 4, so it's going to be plus or minus 4i. The last thing I need to do is move over that 3. I get x equals 3 plus or minus 4i, and that's my answer. And for this, you can write the answer just like I have it here, or if you prefer, you can write it as x equals 3 plus 4i, x equals 3 minus 4i. Either one of those is okay. Okay, we're going to do one other type of problem, and that is using the quadratic formula. And I think that you guys have done the quadratic formula. I'm pretty sure you did it in Algebra 1. You may have done it before or after that too. So the quadratic formula, basically what we have is, I'm not going to show you the whole way of getting it, but I just want you to know be aware of where it came from. We have this function, ax squared plus bx plus c. That is the standard form of a quadratic equation. If you take that equation and you use completing the square on it, you will get the quadratic formula, which we have right here. If you are really curious as to where it came from, there's a lot of videos on that, or if you can ask me and I can show you. But that's where it came from. It's actually using completing the square with that standard form equation. So the way that you're going to use the quadratic formula is, the first thing, if you look at number 1, you need to start by writing it in standard form. It's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So we're going to write it in that form. I do that by moving over that 3. So I get 2x squared plus 6x minus 3 equals 0. The next thing that you need to do is you need to identify a, b, and c. So the a is going to be the coefficient of the x squared, which is 2. The b is the coefficient of the x, which is 6. And the c is that constant, which is negative 3. One of the big mistakes that I see people make is they identify the b as 6x. I'm not sure why it only happens with the b, they don't do it with the a. So just be careful. We don't include any variables within our a, b, and c. And the next thing that you're going to do is you are going to substitute into the formula and simplify. So it's going to be x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 6 squared, minus 4 times 2 times negative 3 all over 2 times 2. So we substitute it into the formula. The last thing that we're going to do, and this is normally like one of the hardest parts, when the places where people make the most mistakes, is we have to simplify. So I do want to warn you that this thing on the bottom is underneath the entire top. I'm going to write it as negative 6 plus or minus the square root. And we're going to do the stuff that's inside of the radical first. So I'm going to do the 6 squared first. The other thing I can do on this step is I can combine this stuff right here. And one of the biggest places that people make mistakes is with negatives. So you'll notice I have a minus in the middle and I have a -3. Negative times a negative is a positive. So make sure you are aware of what sign you have. Then I'm going to do 4 times 2 times 3. That gives me 24. In my denominator, I have 2 times 2, which is 4. And I'm going to keep on simplifying. I get -6 plus or minus the square root of 60 over 4. Unfortunately, here, I do have to go further because 60 is something that can be simplified in the radical. So I get -6 plus or minus. So 60, if you want, you can do it on the side or you can do it on this step. So 60 is the same as the square root of 60 is the same as square root of 4 times the square root of 15. So I do have a perfect square in that. It's going to end up being 2 radical 15 over 4. I still am going to simplify a little bit more. And I know that this ends up being the longest part. The way that I simplify, if I have a single term in the denominator, I actually am going to split it up. It's going to be -6 over 4, and it's going to be plus or minus 2 radical 15 over 4. So it's going to be like this. From there, I can simplify the two fractions I have. So first of all, -6 over 4, if you divide both the top and the bottom, it reduces down to -3 over 2. The 2 radical 15 over 4, people tend to have lots of problems with this. If you want to, you can just kind of remember that you're looking at the number in front of the radical. We're going to look at the 2 and the 4. Those two simplifies, 2 over 4 simplifies down to 1/2. So you can write it as 1 radical 15 over 4. Usually, though, we don't even write that 1, so I'm just going to write it as radical 15 over 4. And I'm also going to put a plus or minus in the middle. So if you feel comfortable about this, feel free to try number 2 on your own. If not, you can just watch. Okay, so for number 2, the first thing I'm going to do is move it so that everything is on one side of my equal sign. And you can either do that by moving the x squared to the right, or you can move the other stuff to the left. My general preference is that I move the 2x and the 5 to the left side, just so that I have a positive x squared. It doesn't really matter, though. You'll get the same answer as me in the end. You'll just have some more negatives. So I'm going to get x squared minus 2x plus 5 equals 0. Make sure that you write it in order so you get the correct A, B, and C. Sometimes people write it as like x squared plus 5 minus 2x equals 0. That's not wrong, but just know that the B is the 2 and the C is the 5 if you do it that way. So in this case, there's no number in front of the x squared, but actually that means that it's like there's an invisible 1 in front of there. So it's A equals 1, B is equal to -2, and C equals 5. So now we're going to plug those things into that formula. I get x equals negative b, so I have minus 2. That's going to become a plus. And then I get 2 plus or minus the square root of -2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5. It is all over 2a, which is 2 times 1. And then I have to simplify. So I get 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 minus 20 all over 2. That gives me 2 plus or minus the square root of -16 over 2. And you might notice that we have another imaginary number. So -16, square root of -16, ends up being 4i. So I get 2 plus or minus 4i over 2. As with the previous one, I am going to split this up. If you don't split it up, but you remember to divide both the 2 and the 4 by 2, that's fine. However you do this, though, you should get 1 plus or minus 2i. And once again, you can write it as x equals 1 plus 2i, x equals 1 minus 2i, or you can just write it like the way that I have it boxed right here.